go to the book of Numbers. That's in the Old Testament of the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. Go to Numbers 13. We're going to look mostly at chapter 13 and some into 14. And then if you haven't already, find your message notes, pull those out, and let's get moving here. Numbers, okay, let me say it like this. I love all the Bible, but of course, the Gospels are the Gospels. I mean, those are amazing. But I love a lot of the Old Testament because of the rich history that's there. And not just the history, but the literature that's there. And there are some amazing, it sounds silly to even put it this way, but I'm not sure of a better way. There are amazing stories there. And there is the story in Numbers 13 and 14 of where 10 spies go out, and we'll get more into that in just a minute, or 12 spies go out. 10 come with a negative message, 2 come with a positive message for what God wants them to do. And it's a story, frankly, and some of you will recognize this, that I come back to again and again. I keep pretty detailed records on things that I teach, topics that I teach, books and different chapters. And this is a text that I come back to sometimes once a year or every other year. And to be honest with you, I can't even tell you why all the time. It's a story that just draws me back. And today we're going to spend some time unpacking it. And instead of just focusing on one person in the story, we're going to be looking at a group of people. And this story, you'll recognize this as we unpack it. It has some of the most recognizable names in the Bible just in these verses. And before we start unpacking it, before I give you a little bit of backstory, I'm going to give you the big idea of today's message. The direction of your life is shaped more by the way you see things than by the things you see. The direction of your life is shaped more by the way you see things than by the things you see. In other words, it's your perspective. It's how you look at things. It's how you see things. It's your point of view. Think of it like this. It's how you frame life. It's how you take what you can physically see and how you crop that. Your point of view, the way you see things, the way you frame life, it affects the way you see yourself, the way you see your spouse, the way you see the future, the way you see other people, the way you see God, church, everything in your life. Your perspective makes the difference. And let me tell you why this is so powerful. It's powerful because your perspective can either open your life up to the power and blessings of God, or your perspective, the way you see things, can shut you out. For the next 2 weeks, we're going to talk about how we see things. Next week, we're going to talk about how to see things with eyes of faith. Today, we're going to talk about the consequences or the dangers of seeing through eyes of fear. What kind of things, Jimmy? Well, things like your marriage, things like your finances, your health, every area of your life. And let me add this wrinkle. That includes any area of your life where you need a miracle. Some of you here today, you need a miracle. You need God to do something big in your life. You need Him to do something that you can't do. And whether you get that miracle, whether you get that blessing, whether that need is met or not, a lot of it depends on your perspective. You ever heard someone say there's more than one way to look at something? Ever heard that? It's true. And the Bible shows it to be true. And in the book of Numbers, God shows us by example that there are at least two ways of looking at everything. One is you can look at the things in your life in general, with faith in God, or you can see everything through the eyes of fear. Now, before we get into Numbers 13, by the way, you're still with me?
Yeah.
I want to give you a little bit of the backstory because I think this is important, especially in a book like Numbers. So the book of Numbers, anybody know why it's named Numbers? It gets its name because there's a census that's taken of the people who have left Egyptian slavery and are now with Moses out in the Sinai desert. And the census is unrolled or unpacked in the first few chapters. And the purpose of the census is to organize the people and prepare them for travel, to guard the tabernacle, and even to fight. Some of these people are going to be arranged in ways they can fight. And God was giving them this land that they're going in to take over, and they're going to have to fight for it. Now Moses, say Moses. Moses, he led the Israelites out of Egyptian slavery. They had been in slavery for about 450 years. And they have had an amazing experience. I mean, really starting to just before being released from Egyptian slavery, they saw all that God did through the plagues in Egypt. And then God carried them through to the Red Sea. And now they're on the way to the Promised Land. Many years earlier, about 450 years earlier, God had promised their forefather, Abraham, to make him a father of many children and that he would become a great nation. And as a part of his blessings, he's going to give them a land, the land of Canaan. It was promised to him. That's why it's called the Promised Land. Well, Moses and the people had been out in the wilderness for about 2 years, and now they're on the border of going into the Promised Land. They are literally, and this is amazing if you really get into this sort of thing, they are on the edge of realizing one of the greatest promises God ever made his people. They're camped at a place called Kadesh. Say Kadesh. And God is saying to them, okay, it's time to go into the land. I want you to send spies to check out the land. So they selected these spies, 12 of them. The spies have gone out and they've come back to Camp Kadesh with their reports. And 10 of them had negative things to say. Only 2 of them had positive reports. And this is critical. It's critical to the story. In fact, not only the story we're unpacking today, but the story for perhaps generations and generations to come. The 10 spies with negative reports, they saw things through eyes of fear. Only 2 of the spies saw things through eyes of faith. 10 of them said, listen, there are all kind of obstacles there. Only 2 of them said there are some great opportunities here. It was all about their perspective. And what they did and didn't do based on the people is tragic. Just to give it away, this story has a tragic ending, at least this part of it. I mean, ultimately, in God's story, it's going to end the way it should. But here, it's a tragedy. And it's a tragedy because the majority of the leaders here, and these spies were leaders, the majority of them had the wrong perspective. And it caused the children of Israel to stall in the desert and not go in and take over this place that God had promised them. They couldn't see what God wanted them to see. They say everything rises and falls on leadership. Maybe it's not fair, but man, there are a lot of examples that prove that to be true, and here's one of them. 10 leaders caused an entire nation to die out in the desert without a home because they couldn't have faith in God. Their faith impacted the generation of children they were raising, and then generations coming behind them. All right, let's get into the story. Numbers 13. The Lord said to Moses, "Send out men to explore the land of Canaan, the land that I'm giving the Israelites. Send one leader from each of the 12 ancestral tribes." So Moses did as the Lord commanded. He sent out 12 men, all tribal leaders of Israel, from their camp in the wilderness of Paran. These are the tribes, the names of the leaders. So the nation of Israel divided up into 12 tribes. They're all the sons of Jacob. You can read all about it in Genesis, I think it's chapters 25 through 50. I'm going to give you the names of the spies, or not the names of the spies, but the tribes that they came from. You know why? Because some of these names are pretty hard to pronounce. I could fake it. I don't think you'd know, but I'm just going to give you the tribes. They're Reuben, Simeon, Judah, Issachar, Ephraim, Benjamin, Zebulun, Manasseh, who's the son of Joseph, Gad, son of Susi, Dan, Asher, Naphtali, and Gad. These are the names of the men that Moses sent out to explore the land. Moses called Hoshea, say Hoshea. He's the son of Nun. He called him by the name of Joshua. Now let me tell you a little about Hoshea. Hoshea means deliverer. So just think about it. Every time someone called out to Hoshea, what they're really saying is, "Hey, deliverer, come over here," or, whatever you're looking for. But that's what his name meant. Names meant something then. But Moses changed his name to Joshua, which means God delivers, or Jehovah is salvation. And I think this is important because Joshua is Moses' assistant. He's going to become a great military leader for the people. He's going to be the successor of Moses, who finally leads the children of Israel into the promised land. And this new name is going to be important for him and also future generations of Israelites. Because once they go into the promised land, instead of saying Hoshea and recognizing that Hoshea was their deliverer, instead they will call out his name or look at him and remember that God, not a man, delivered them into the promised land. You see the difference? It's a huge difference. Verse 17. Moses gave the men these instructions as he sent them out to explore the land. Go north through the Negev into the hill country. See what the land is like and find out whether the people living there are strong or weak, few or many. They're like NFL scouts. See what kind of land they live in. Is it good or bad? Do the towns have walls, or are they unprotected like open camps? Is the soil fertile or poor? Are there many trees? Do your best to bring back samples of the crops you see. And then the note there is, it happened to be the season of harvesting the first ripe grapes. Verse 21. So they went out and explored the land from the wilderness of Zin as far as Rehob near Leboamath. Going north, they passed through the Negev and arrived in Hebron, where Ahiman, Sheshi, and Talmai, all descendants of Anak, lived. The ancient town of Hebron was founded 7 years before the Egyptian city of Zoan, which would have been an important note for the people that were reading and hearing this for the first time. When they came to the valley of Eshcol, they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes so large that it took 2 of them to carry it on a pole between them. Imagine that.
Wow.
And you thought Mooresville was wine country. They also brought back samples of the pomegranates and figs. That place was called the Valley of Eshcol, which means cluster. You can understand why. This is where the story transitions. This is where the spies return and they give their report. Verse 25. After exploring the land for 40 days, the men returned to Moses, Aaron, and the whole community of Israel at Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran. They reported to the whole community what they had seen, showed them the fruit they had taken from the land. This was their report to Moses. We entered the land you sent us to explore, and it indeed is a bountiful country, a land flowing with milk and honey, sheep's milk and date honey. Here's the kind of fruit it produces. So you can just imagine they're showing, it's quite an effect to, for the two guys to come walking out and they're carrying one cluster of grapes. You know that the people had to be excited. Oh my goodness, this is great. And then verse 28 begins by saying, but. This is a big but. But the people living there were powerful, and the towns are large and fortified. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. The Amalekites live in the Negev. And in the land of Canaan, the Canaanites is really just an umbrella term for a lot of the people groups that were living there. And the ones he's calling out here, these are the ones that were legendary for being just really tough, bad, evil, mean people. The Amalekites are there. And the Hittites, the Jebusites, and Amorites, they live in the hill country. The Canaanites live along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea and along the Jordan Valley. And so Caleb, he's kind of an instinctive leader. He can sort of see that this is going the wrong way. So he tried to quiet the people as they stood before Moses. Let's go at once and take the land, he said. We can certainly conquer it. But the other men who had explored the land with him disagreed. We can't go up against them. They're stronger than we are. So they spread this bad report about the land among the Israelites. They go from tribe to tribe, telling them how bad things are, how tough the people are who are living there. This is what they're saying. The land we traveled through and explored will devour anyone who goes to live there. All the people we saw were huge. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. And next to them we felt like grasshoppers. And that's what they thought too. Here's the point. The spies of Israel let fear stop them from doing what God wanted them to do. It was fear that kept them out of the promised land and out of the blessing and favor of God. It was their fear that kept them from doing something worthwhile with their lives. It was their fear that kept them from living in the blessing and the promise and the purpose God had called them to. They had eyes of fear, not eyes of faith. Let me show you two things that fear produces in our lives. Here they are. If you're taking notes, write this down. Number one, fear shrinks our view of God. Fear shrinks our view of God. In Numbers 13:28, the spies report, but the people living there are powerful, and their towns are large and fortified. We even saw giants living there, the descendants of Anak. The amazing thing, and listen, you can find this amazing as well. Just remember that we do the same thing very often. You have to fight against this. The leaders and the children of Israel, these spies who have been sent out, they seem to have forgotten that just 2 years before, God had led them out of bondage and slavery to one of the greatest powers and cultures history has ever known, the Egyptians. I mean, the Egyptians were the superpower of their time, but without an army. God forced Pharaoh to let his people go, and they gave them the wealth of Egypt as they walked out the front door. And now just 2 years later, here they are in fear and trembling because of a few local tribe leaders. You ever notice that the longer you look at a problem, the more it grows? I'm not suggesting that, whether it's in home, life, business life, whatever it is, that you shouldn't look at problems and analyze them and really know what you're dealing with. But I will tell you this, at some point you have to stop looking at the problem. Because the longer you look at the problem, the more you will start to see that problem as a mountain. It's called making a mountain out of a molehill. The more you focus on the problem, the bigger it grows, and then fear creeps in. And if you're not careful, like the 10 spies, you start talking up the enemy. You're like, well, of course that's a big problem, and we could never solve it. Of course that's something that's too big for us. Let me give you something on the back side of this that I think is really interesting. About 40 years later, when God finally allowed the children of Israel to go into the promised land, more spies were sent out. And the spies ran into a woman who lived there. Her name was Rahab, a local girl. And she said to the spies, for 40 years we've been living here in fear, afraid of the day that your God would send you in to attack us. Now, I'm sure that in one sense that's comforting. That's a yay God moment. It's also a moment for those new spies to think, if Daddy and Granddaddy would have had more faith, we would already be living in this land. We would already have conquered it. Here's a second thing that fear does. Fear shrinks our view of ourselves. In verse 33, the spies said, we saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. To them, it felt like we were grasshoppers, and that's what they thought about us too. And talk about a negative self-image. I mean, compared to them, we're just insects. And in their minds, they're already eaten up. This is over. We could never do this. This project is just too big for us. Here's the lesson I want you to take away from this. It's usually not the problem that defeats you. It's the way you see the problem. I mean, could it be any clearer from this? So think about what you're facing right now. Think about what you're dealing with. Think about what you're going up against. Regardless of what it is, the problem is not the problem. The real problem is the way you see the problem. It's your perspective on the problems. Let me remind you of what the Bible says in 1 John 4:4. You have this in your notes. It says, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. I'll give you one more. This is not in your notes, but you can jot down the address and look it up later. It's Matthew 19:26. Jesus said, with men this is impossible. But with God all things are impossible. In fact, I'll just tell you that the word impossible is not even in God's vocabulary. Not if He's called you to it. Not if He has called you to it. So I was going to stop the message here. And then I thought, no, let me give you 3 more things that fear will do. 3 things that happen when you look through eyes of fear rather than faith. Number 1, fear leaves you discouraged. Fear will leave you discouraged. Numbers 14 verse 1 says, then the whole community began weeping aloud, and they cried all night. They got discouraged. So the promise that God had been making them, I think I have the math right, is something like 800 years ago. The promise that God had made to them, all of that's gone out the window. Now they're just sitting and stewing in the bad report of the 10 spies. And they have the wrong perspective. And the fears overtook them. They got caught up in the negative emotions of the moment. They lost sight of the fact that God can do anything in and through them. If you insist on only thinking about the problems, whether that's in your marriage, your extended family, your business, your company, people you work with, your church, if you insist on only looking at the problems through eyes of fear, you'll get discouraged. Here's the second thing that happens. Fear keeps you dissatisfied. Fear keeps you dissatisfied. The Bible says in Numbers 14:2, the voices rose in a great chorus of protest against Moses and Aaron. It's the leader's fault. I knew it. And hey, sometimes it is. But sometimes it's the way the majority is looking at things. So first the people, they mourn, they crowd and groaning, and then the next thing they did is they started complaining. And let me tell you something, this group of people that we're talking about here, they specialized in complaining. I mean, it seems like it was their spiritual gift. At one point, they were so unhappy with Moses, they were going to stone him to death, and they would have if God had not stopped them. And so just think about that. Moses is one of the greatest leaders in history, and they complained to him about him and the conditions they were living in from the time they left Egypt. Man, is anything more draining than a person who complains about everything? You must be sitting beside your complainer. Because I see some of you going, I just can't say anything. He's sitting right here with me. Over the years, I've learned that people who feel like failures, they're the greatest critics. The best known literary critics always wanted to be writers. The most popular movie critics wanted to be directors or movie stars themselves. People who don't feel good about themselves or they feel like they failed at something, they complain about those who do try things and do step out in faith and do accomplish things. I saw that growing up in the home of a small businessman. You know, growing up, we had some things that some of my cousins didn't have. We had some things that friends of ours they didn't necessarily have. And they were, at times, our biggest critics. Not my critic. I didn't do anything but be born in their home. But they became big critics of my parents. Because they thought they could have done something, but they didn't. They could have stepped out and tried something. And so they have this skewed vision of what life is really like for you. They just become great critics. Well, when the Israelites had an opportunity, they didn't take it. And so what did the people do? They start blaming the leaders who were trying to lead them in the right direction. They blamed everyone but themselves. And then here's another consequence of fear. Fear persuades you to give up. It causes you to quit. Look at Numbers 14:3. The people said, "Why is the Lord taking us into this country only to have us die in battle? Our wives and our little ones will be carried off as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to just return to Egypt?" Let's go back to Egypt. What are you, stupid? But you can't say that when you're the leader. You have to pick your words. What do you mean? You're lamenting the good old days when you were slaves to the Egyptians. They preferred slavery to safety. You know, maybe one of the best things about humans is also one of the worst things about us. We adapt to life. The problem is that some of us would rather live as slaves, emotionally, relationally, and spiritually, than risk freedom. I mean, think about it. Maybe somebody in this room, but I'll guarantee you someone watching online, you've been living with that sickness or whatever the it is for so long. It's how you're identified. It's how people know you. It's how you know yourself. And even though you might not like the position you're in, even though you might not like where you are in life, you've learned how to live that way. You've adapted to it. And that's easier than taking a risk. That's easier than having faith in God. That's what happens to the people here. They're saying we'd rather just go back to Egypt and live as slaves rather than take the risk of having faith and trusting in God to keep His promises. And let me tell you something. God keeps His promises. If God has called you to something or to somewhere, He keeps His promises. And it's likely, and hey, listen, I hold this up as a diagnostic test in my own life. If it feels like God's not keeping His end of the bargain, you need to recognize God always keeps His end of the promise. You are likely the problem. And the tragic thing here is that the people, they lost their momentum and died in the desert when all they needed was a different perspective. So I know what you're thinking. You think, Jimmy, I'm convinced. So now that I'm convinced, I need to see my problems, my obstacles, my life opportunities. I need to see that through eyes of faith, not fear. We're going to talk about the how of faith next week. But I want to close with this. When we were born, we're given these senses, 5 senses: hearing, taste, touch, smell, and sight. Everything you experience in your life, it comes through these things. Well, when you're spiritually born again, you got spiritual senses. And some of you here, you're born-again Christians, and you have to stop pretending like the only reality is what you can see physically. Because we live in a world, in a reality that is every bit as spiritual as it is physical. And you have to have spiritual eyes to see what God is doing in the world and what He wants you doing in the world right here, right now. If you're going to do anything for God, you have to see the world through His eyes. And all throughout the Scriptures, there are times when God is trying to get people to see through spiritual eyes. One of those moments is in Genesis 13, verses 14 through 17. I'm going to read it to you. I want you to just lean in and listen to this. It was a down time, okay? It was a down time for Abraham. Lot, the guy that he and his wife Sarah were raising, they hadn't had children of their own. They're raising Lot to be the heir to whatever they have to leave behind. And they can't get along. And so Lot goes off on his own. And so now Abraham has all these questions about the future. And then God said to him, up on this mountain, look as far as you can see in every direction, north and south, east and west. I'm giving you all of this land. Not today. In fact, it wouldn't come in Abraham's lifetime, but it would come in the life of his children. I'm giving all of this land as far as you can see to you and your descendants as a permanent possession. And I'm going to add this part in here just because I know this part. And even though you and Sarah haven't had a child of your own, and maybe when you look at your life right now, you think, okay, we're in those prime birthing years. Or maybe Sarah is feeling the pressure of her biological clock ticking away, and we don't have kids. And even in that situation, God says to Abram, I will give you so many descendants that, like the dust of the earth, they cannot be counted. Go and walk through the land in every direction, for I'm giving it to you. Abraham believed God because he saw with spiritual eyes. Now let me tell you something. When God made that promise, there were Canaanites everywhere. If you were Abraham and you could only see through physical eyes, you would have said, no way. If he would have looked at his own circumstances, we can't have children, we've been trying, it hasn't happened, you would say, no way. But because he could see with spiritual eyes, here are his children, his descendants at Camp Kadesh. And they're about to take the promised land. But they couldn't see what Grandpa could. What do you think God is preparing you for? I've been asking myself that question. I've been asking that question for the church. What's he getting ready for us? What is he preparing us for? I'm not exactly sure what it is, but let me tell you what I do know for sure. I know that at some point, every church comes to its own Camp Kadesh. Every person eventually comes to his or her Camp Kadesh. And let me tell you something, it's a place where the stakes are high, the risk is great, and you can either move forward in faith, or because of fear, you can settle for the comfort zone, which is just a place of safety. And while it's safe there, it's full of mediocrity. I still believe as a church that God is calling us further into the promised land, which is further into His promise for our church. And like there have been since the very beginning, there are going to be giants. There are going to be obstacles. There are going to be fortified cities that we have to attack. And the question will always have to come back to this. Will we have the faith to go in and get it done? These are things you have to ask yourself in your own life too. Are we willing to sacrifice prayerfully, materially, and in every way in order to do something significant for God in our community and in the world? Are we going to see through eyes of fear or faith? Let's stand together. Once you stand, just bow your head and close your eyes and let's pray. Heavenly Father, right now I want to pray for our people. The people, of course, that are in this room and those that are watching online. But then, Lord, it's the summertime, and so we have folks away on vacation and have different things like that. We include us as a people. Lord, whatever it is you're calling us into, help us to see through eyes of faith and not fear. At least help us to be open to it. Lord, I pray for our church and what you're calling us into, where you're leading us. Help us to be open to faith and closed to fear. I pray that for our community. I pray it for our country. Help us to be able to see what you are showing us, what you want for us, where you want us to go as a country, as a people, as a family, as a church. Give us the courage to follow. We pray in Jesus'